Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. And, well, we finally made it. It is September 3rd. The dark ages of the NHL schedule is past us. Players are going to start to trickle in. Training camps are getting ready to happen. There's Penguins hockey in 18 days. Now it's preseason hockey, but it's hockey nonetheless in 18 days. And we have a lot of things to discuss leading up to that point. And that's what we're going to do to kick things off on today's show. We're going to preview what should be a very busy month for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then we have a couple of interesting recurring segments that we're bringing back for this episode, including a quick game of Name That Stat Line that is going to have a point that I'm going to make, and finishing things off with our weekly Pens poll. Let's get started. And let's start things off with the top storylines to watch in the month of September for the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Pens, next weekend, not this upcoming one, but the following one, will be at the Prospects Challenge on Friday, Saturday, and Monday. 3 games of prospect hockey that you're going to be able to watch. I'm sure the Penguins are going to announce where you can watch that. Last year, it was on the Penguins app, I believe, as well as their YouTube channel. So we'll see if they do the same thing again, but you would assume that they have somewhere where you're going to be able to watch those 3 games. And then, like I mentioned off the top, first preseason game in 18 days. It's kind of crazy that we're already to this point. I have to kind of pinch myself and say, all right, hockey's almost back. 18 days till camp, as we mentioned, and just over a month away from the opener against the New York Rangers.
Yeah, it felt like it was a long summer, but also not a long summer at the same time, because there was always been, as we'll get into in a moment here, one big piece of news that is yet to drop. It could have dropped at any point after July 1st. And we're still here waiting for it as we approach the opening of training camp and as these prospects and rookie camps start kicking off. The Penguins are still waiting to drop that one big piece of news that we all at this point expect will just happen at the beginning of training camp or just before it. So that way everyone's in town, everyone's ready, everyone's paying attention. It can get done. There can be the big press conference if there needs to be, and then we can go about our lives. But that's kind of what has made this whole summer sort of fly by for Penguins fans a little bit, is that there's always been that one thing to sort of wait on that we, that everyone's just been sitting back, refreshing Twitter, refreshing Facebook, waiting for the first new bit of information to come out.
Yeah, and obviously that is going to be the biggest storylines. We'll give you the 3 biggest, but that is the biggest one, and that is Sidney Crosby's contract extension, or as of this moment, the lack thereof, a contract extension. He's blown through 2, and I'll call these publicly created deadlines, which was one, July 1st, which everybody said, all right, this is an easy deal to make. They're just going to make it, get it on the back burner, call it a day, and let everybody go about their business. Well, they didn't do that. The reasons being, reportedly, that Sidney Crosby said, Kyle Dubas has a lot on his plate right now. He's trying to form the team for next season. We'll revisit that when everything calms down from free agency and obviously the draft and the rookie development camp that came up right after that. And then, of course, there was the deadline of August 7th, which means a lot to Sidney Crosby, not enough for him to sign his contract on that date. So he blew through those 2 deadlines that were nowhere in the organization as actual deadlines, but publicly they felt like deadlines. Well, now, will he start camp without a deal? I think that is the question that is on everybody's mind. I would say there's no chance in hell that he ends up starting camp without a deal, because then, as most people have alluded to, he's going to have to answer questions about that. And that's the last thing that he wants to talk about whenever he's trying to gear up for the 2024-25 season. So if he doesn't have a deal in place by the time he steps foot for organized team activities, not any of these informal skates that are happening right now this week, they'll happen next week as well with some of the players that are getting ready for training camp. But if he steps onto the ice for that first true training camp practice without a contract, that's when I start to wonder, Horwat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that he'll sign it the day before.
Probably.
Whichever day camp's set to start off, I expect something to drop the day before, and then the Penguins will go from there. I'd be curious to, you're right, because he doesn't want to answer questions about, why there still isn't a deal signed. He doesn't want to enter that sort of media availability with that lingering over, because that's the only thing that anyone's going to ask about. That there won't be any questions of how's the team look this year. You've had a practice. How do your What are you playing with? How do your line mates look? How are they? It'll be none of that. There might be one toward the end whenever Sid, after 4 or 5 questions, finally goes, "Can we talk about hockey a little bit?"
You think he'd let it get to 4 or 5? I think he'd let it get to 2 or 3 and then call it a day.
He'd just be given the same answer over and over again, and just knowing some of the media that might be there, it might continue. But I'm confident that it'll get signed probably the day before camp starts, that first media availability. I'd be curious to know if he'll open the door a little bit as to why it took so long. What was the, I don't want to say what was the holdup, but were there any holdups? What was the idea behind putting everything off for so long? Is it true that it was just a confidence level between both parties? It was just, we knew it was going to get done. We weren't super worried about putting pen to paper right away. We just wanted to enjoy our summers. We wanted to not worry about work so much per se, and just get the time off, recuperate, get ready for a new season. And then, pretty much he could even say we had the deal in place late July. We just waiting until the right time to announce it. So that way we could sort of come in with a new mojo almost into camp. Like I said, do it the day before. The vibes are high. Start off the season on a high note like that.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's other questions that people are going to be asking Sidney Crosby. I'm sure one of them is going to be, what are his thoughts on Rutger McGroarty? Because that is probably the biggest, or at least the shiniest new toy that the Penguins have at their disposal, and probably the shiniest new toy that Sidney Crosby has on his wing at some point this season. We don't think, that might not be at the start of the season. It might not be at the start of training camp, but at some point this season, you would have to imagine Rutger McGroarty gets out there on the ice alongside Sidney Crosby, and people are going to want to know what Crosby thinks of the young 20-year-old. He's going to be in action, McGroarty, that is, in 10 days at the Prospect Challenge. He is expected to be on that roster. There's a lot of excitement surrounding him this camp, and I think that's the second biggest storyline is, what does he look like, right? How does he kick things off? Because there are high expectations for him, because he is the best young player the Penguins have had probably since Jake Gensel back in 2017, and I think there's even more expectation for Rutger McGroarty coming in, because Gensel, I think a lot of people said, oh, he could be good, he could be decent, and then he came in and blew the doors off of everybody's expectations. People are expecting Rutger McGroarty to come in and be an impactful player in year one at the age of 20. I think that is going to be a huge storyline to follow, how he handles that pressure and how he handles being in an NHL organization, knowing there's a very good chance that he's starting the year at the National Hockey League level.
Yeah, he said he hasn't been given that role yet. He's going to have to earn it, obviously. But look at this lineup and look at who he may have higher expectations than. It's going to be him above quite a few people, going to be him above quite a few of the prospects, above those youngsters that maybe could have fought for roles, but now it's going to be almost his spot to lose. Again, he will have to earn it still, but he's going to start off with a pretty big head start, I would assume. And then, when it comes to following that storyline, that's going to be exciting. He is, before it was him, it was maybe Kevin Hayes is the biggest piece the Penguins added in terms of just namesake, star power, all of that sort of thing. Not necessarily numbers or playing ability or stats, but McGroarty comes in as the Penguins' newest top prospect, without doubt, clearly, and the most NHL ready prospect out of anyone in the system. So, it's going to be his spot to lose, and I'm excited to see and I'm excited to follow what he can do and see where he's playing. Again, I know early training camp won't be a good indicator of where he's going to play in the season, but curious to see where Sullivan and the coaching staff line him up to start camp, and then kind of see where he goes from there.
Now, the final storyline that I want to headline and highlight going into the month of September is the goaltending battle between Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic, and who's going to be able to shine early in this battle, because I do think that, especially considering the fact that the Penguins were open to trading Tristan Jarry this summer, all reports indicate that they were at the very least open to have those discussions and hear other teams and see what is out there available in return for Tristan Jarry. How does he respond to that? Because he's going to see that. He's going to be aware of that. He knows that last year was not a good ending for him. How does he respond early in camp? And can Alex Nedeljkovic take the top spot away from him? It's going to be a battle between those two early in camp to try to one-up each other. And of course, everybody expects it to be a healthy battle, because nothing that Jarry nor Nedeljkovic have said have led us to believe that there is any dissension between those two. They seem to like each other genuinely, but there is competition there, and there is competition between the two of them. And then on top of that, how do those two young prospects perform? Nobody expects them to challenge for an NHL roster spot out of camp, but everybody has high expectations for them at the AHL level. What do they look like going up against the Crosbys, the Malkins, the Rusts, the McGroartys, if you want to throw him in as well? How do they look against some of these talented players? Because for Blomqvist, it's year 2. He has a little bit of a resume. He has a little bit of experience to go back on. For Sergei Murashov, all it was rookie development camp. Like, that's all he has over in North America as of right now in the Penguins organization. So how does he respond? How does he react to his first camp? He's been lights out in everything he's done, but that is a small sample size. So I'm excited to see how those two do, but more specifically, I'm excited to see how Jari and Nedeljkovic handle this type of goaltending battle, and really how the coaching staff handles these two goaltenders early in camp.
Yeah, that'll just be fascinating to see. I mean, when it comes to the Penguins and their goaltending situation, I know we talked tandems last episode, but it's weird to say that there isn't a wrong answer whenever it comes to who the Penguins decide to roll with as their duo, let alone their starter. If you want to go with Jari, Nedeljkovic 1-2, that's fine. That's what you've been doing. It's just a continuation of what really should be the expectation anyway. If you go Nedeljkovic, Jari is the 1-2. Okay, well, that's the way you ended last season. Also a good answer. Let's say, again, now is when the spitballing starts. Let's say you're halfway through camp, you realize, okay, it's Nedeljkovic's net, he's stealing this. And, oh, look, so is one of the prospects. I won't get into deeper than that. Okay, well, you've rehashed those you re-grease those trade wheels all of a sudden. And I guess I'm spitballing here.
Yeah.
And now you're rolling with Nedeljkovic prospect, name prospect. It could be either of them. And then same goes the other way, too. If you really, I mean, I know they just signed Nedeljkovic again, but if he's losing the net and looks poor, and Jari's pulling away, and the Penguins have that sort of confidence that he's going to sustain it, you grease those wheels too. That one's way less likely. That is the least likely option here.
That's not on the table at all.
Exactly. It's the least likely option of anything I just named here. Because if that's happening, you do just roll Nedeljkovic, Jari, or Jari Nedeljkovic and figure something out. But those are the options essentially that are out there, and it's likely going to be one of the first ones, which is Jari starting Nedeljkovic backup or vice versa.
Yeah, I think two things. One, as much as I like Murashov, he's not coming anywhere near the NHL this year. So if there is going to be a prospect, it's going to be Joel Blomqvist, and I also still think that he's a little while off, but more realistic than Murashov. And then the trading Nedeljkovic part of this is not a conversation. Just throwing that out there. Don't have that talk, because Tristan Jari is one of, if not the most unreliable goaltenders heading into this season. You're not going to throw a rookie behind him and say, yeah, that's going to be good enough. It's not going to happen. But it is going to be, I mean, between the four of them, there's a lot of talent in that room. The young guys have inexperience, which is why they're not going to be able to get that opportunity to fight for NHL roster spots right out of camp. But I'm interested to see, of course, the big thing is going to be how do they grow throughout camp, and how do they put themselves and where do they position themselves going into the regular season.
Yeah, let me throw one more thing in, because you also have to remember where the Penguins were the last time during the exit meetings, during the exit interviews. It was essentially, we're not sure where the goaltending position is going. It was Kyle Dubas saying, we want to see what Joel Blomqvist can do in the AHL playoffs for him to set himself up for possibly an NHL role this upcoming season. He lost in that opening 3-game series round. And at the time, I mean, before that even happened, Nedeljkovic was an upcoming free agent. I think he said he would like to stay, but then again, who doesn't say that? But it was, I don't want to say it was a foregone conclusion that he was getting, he was heading to free agency, but it seemed likely that it was going to be Jari, or Jari would be traded and then things would be figured out from there. It seemed almost certain at the time that Blomqvist was going to be coming in with the spot of backup set for him almost. Then he didn't get that playoff run, so all of a sudden it turned into a 3-horse race again. I think that's sort of where, at least at the time of, those locker cleanout meetings, those interviews, that's what it stood. and then not getting a playoff run kind of evened the playing field again.
Yeah, I feel like it would have had to be a really deep playoff run, and he would have had to be one of the driving factors in the deep playoff run for them to consider going into next season with him as the number 2 behind Tristan Jarry. I think there was always a plan of, hey, we're going to look out for somebody to be a 1B. And whenever it was Nedeljkovic that was re-signed, that told you that, hey, the Penguins just don't think Blomqvist is quite ready yet. And that's okay. He's only had 1 year on North American ice. And I think that if he has this year again, I think then you start having the conversation in next year's training camp. But I feel like there was never a consideration, unless he would have gone on a great Calder Cup run, that Blomqvist was going to be the number 2 to Tristan Jarry specifically. So again, those are all hypotheticals at this point. I mean, you look back on it, I was shocked. You were shocked that Alex Nedeljkovic was re-signed, especially for 2 years, 2.5. That's a significant contract for a backup goaltender in the National Hockey League. So where we stand today, I think there's a lot of questions about that position for both the short-term and long-term future for the Penguins. I mean, you look at those 2 goaltenders, something's got to give. You're hoping both of them pan out. That'd be great. It'd be a good problem to have. But again, there's a lot of development left in front of both Blomqvist and Marshall. Let's move over and go to name that stat line. We don't do this too often, but I think there's a point to this one. All of these players are going to be stat lines from the 2022-23 season, and all of the players are new to the Pittsburgh Penguins this offseason. So guys that came in the last couple of months, we're going to talk about their stat lines from 2022-23. I'll give the stat line. Horwat's going to try to guess it. If you're at home, you can play along. But let's get this started with the first stat line from, again, the 2022-23 season, which was not last year. It was the year prior. 81 games played for this player, 18 goals, 54 points, and he has played for 2 of the Penguins' biggest rivals in his career. Can you name that stat line, Horwat?
That sounds like Kevin Hayes' last year in Philly.
It is.
I didn't realize he played 81 games, though. But
he did. Yeah, 81 games, 54 points, and 18 goals. It's a good stat line. Now, he had a bad year in St. Louis, which is why the Blues were willing to utilize a second-round pick to offload his contract. Not only that, then, of course, the Penguins switched some things around, got a second later, got an extra third, whatever. But the Blues didn't want him because he wasn't a fit in St. Louis. If he's a fit in Pittsburgh like he was in Philly, 54 points is a good number right there.
Good puck mover. That's a good depth center, puck moving player. Those are good numbers for that sort of style. I can't even remember the name now, but that's what he should bring to the Penguins exactly, is that sort of playmaking ability that whether he's playing with Puustinen or McGroarty, depending on how things file out. There's a good chance, maybe even who was it? That was supposed to be Islander, whose name Beauvillier maybe be skating up there, because the depth is weird in Pittsburgh. There's a lot of it, but also not a lot of it at the same time.
Yeah.
We'll see how it filters out, but it'll be looking out for Kevin Hayes to have another season like that, to have another playmaking year where he's putting up good numbers in the assist category and scoring every so often whenever he can. I forget. I know they probably haven't labeled this yet. I forget if he's a penalty killer, though.
Yes. He wasn't last year in St. Louis, but he has in his career killed penalties.
Okay. Because also figuring out the organization of the power play will be extremely interesting in Pittsburgh this year.
So you're 1 for 1, and you got that one with relative ease. So let's see if you can keep going, and I'll keep giving you the first hint. We do have a secondary hint if you need it. Let's go to the second player here. 72 games played in the 2022-23 season. He scored 14 goals, 35 points, and Pittsburgh will be his 3rd organization in the NHL.
What were the numbers again?
72 games played, 14 goals, 35 points.
3rd organization. I was going to say Beauvillier, but I feel like Beauvillier has played for 3 in the last year. I
think he has, yeah. He was traded twice last year, so yeah, he played for 3 teams last season.
Yeah. And I'm also forgetting who the Penguins got. The goals numbers seem high, but could it have been Matt Grzelcyk?
It is not Matt Grzelcyk. Okay. It is Cody Glass. Cody Glass for the Nashville Predators had 14 goals, 35 points 2 seasons ago. He comes into Pittsburgh. This is a player that I don't think a lot of people can really nail down where he's going to be early in
Yeah.
camp. I mean, he plays center, he can play the wing, but where do the Penguins have him? I mean, there's a logjam at center with, we already mentioned Kevin Hayes, Lars Eller is down there as well. Blake Lizotte can play center. Sam Poulin can play center. Now Cody Glass is added into that as well. So there's a lot of question marks about where Cody Glass is going to fit, but 35 points a couple of years ago is not a horrible stat line for a player that has been considered a bust among certain fan bases. But looking for a fresh start in Pittsburgh, even if he kind of gets those numbers again, I think it's a solid floor to have. But again, as of right now, it's not his floor, it's closer to his ceiling.
But he's also only 25 still. I think
Exactly.
that's the fun part of Cody Glass here, is that you've said those numbers were 35 points in 72 games. He was 23 in his first full season in Nashville. Again, I don't know exactly what happened whenever he only played 8 games in 21-22. Without looking into it, I always assume injury, but that was his first real long season in the NHL. Career highs in goals, points, assists, games played, even plus minus for that matter. So that's his year to focus on and something to build off of from that. Don't look too much into last season in your 41 games and 13 points. For Cody Glass, that'll have to be his baseline and his target of, let's say playing more than 72 games and then obviously crushing that 35-point number one way or another. And because he's only 25, there's still plenty of room for, I don't want to say figuring out what kind of player you are, but he's got a little more time to sort of earn his positioning and learn and excel and add to his skill set, which the Penguins needed to get younger, and that's one way to adding Cody Glass was one way of doing it.
Yeah, 100%. And it was knee injuries that held Cody Glass out. So obviously you're hoping that he stays healthy. 2 years ago, it's a lot of games played, 72. So it seems like he got over that last year, of course, in and out of the lineup. So we'll see what he's able to do in his first season in Pittsburgh. All right. So you're 1-2, or you're 1-4-2, I should say. Let's see if you can get a winning record here. Let's see if you can hit 2 for 3 on the day. This player played 82 games played in the 2022-23 season, 18 goals, 40 points. And I'll say this player could be anything from a top liner to a waiver option this season for the Penguins.
The waiver option threw me off. You said 40 points? Is this one Anthony Beauvillier?
This is Anthony Beauvillier. If you would have asked for the second hint, which you try not to do, and I appreciate that, even though I do prepare second hints for you. The second hint would have given it away. He's been traded 3 times in the past 2 seasons.
We just discussed it, so yes.
We just discussed it. But Beauvillier, 40 points that season. He had split it with the Islanders and the Canucks. And funny story, 9 goals, 20 points for both teams in that season.
Clean. Those are the stat lines you love seeing.
Yes, 100%. Keep it easy. Keep it simple. Was he better before or after the trade? He was the same.
Yeah, the exact same. Before the season was even over, there was everyone saying or discussing the idea of the Penguins targeting Anthony Beauvillier. And I do think it's interesting that you're right. He could kind of play on the top line, but could also be flown through waivers at any moment. So he'll have a fascinating season regardless of what happens. He'll have a fascinating start with the Penguins because, like I also just said, like you mentioned, he could be on the first line, he could be on the waivers. I pinned him next to Kevin Hayes 20 seconds ago too. Yeah, there's all kind of range this guy can take. That I get in terms of like him and Matt Grzelcyk. I get where fans are coming from and saying that these guys are not as good, maybe not right for the Penguins. Let's give it a shot. Let's see some game action before we jump to those conclusions. And for him specifically, I'm real curious to see what he can do with the Penguins in this new system because, I said most of last year, any New York Islander, whether you like it or not, fits Mike Sullivan's system.
Yeah.
You got to play defense.
At a base level, yes.
Yeah. You got to play defense, and that's something he'll be able to do. We'll see how the offense turns out from there.
Now, here's the reason I chose these 3 players to do today. Hayes, Glass, and Beauvillier all had pretty rough seasons last year, hence the reason they were cheap enough that the Penguins went out and got them for peanuts. But the year prior to that, they all had pretty good seasons. 40 points for Beauvillier, 35 points for Glass, 54 points for Kevin Hayes. You know what all that has in common, it is more points than any bottom six scorer for the Penguins has scored the past 2 seasons. Last year, if you want to count Drew O'Connor, I'll give it to you, but he only had 33 points, and most of those were because he played with Sidney Crosby, and that's where he got the bulk majority of his points. So taking out Drew O'Connor, the 3 leading bottom 6 scorers last season were Lars Eller, 31, Valtteri Puustinen, 20, and Jeff Carter with 15. 2022-23, Jeff Carter with 29, Danton Heinen with 22, and Kasperi Kapanen with 20. So these aren't the best players the Penguins brought in. I understand that, and they're coming off of years that aren't good. But they are not far removed from a 54-point season for Kevin Hayes, a 35-point season for Cody Glass, and a 40-point season for Anthony Beauvillier. So, if anything, this is a reason to have some encouragement for the Penguins' bottom 6 going into this season.
No kidding. Just hearing those names and who led the bottom 6 in scoring, just
Carter's on both lists. Carter is on both lists right now.
And not necessarily last season, but the season before, the 22-23 season, was notably a poor year for him. He did better last year because he was in a different role. I think everyone sort of expected less, and he delivered more. I mean, again, it wasn't phenomenal. It wasn't stand out, but everyone sort of knew this is probably his last year. He's playing fourth line right wing. He's not going to bring a bunch to the table. And then he ended up bringing more to the table than was expected. And yet Jeff Carter was on that list the year before. And like I said, a notably poor year. Also, Danton Heinen and who am I forgetting? Valtteri Puustinen. I mean, those guys got points, but they also never struck anyone as goal scorers. I mean, Puustinen should and likely will. But
last year,
all those numbers are assists. Most of those numbers are assists. He had 3 goals? If I'm not mistaken.
Puustinen had 5 goals, 15 assists, and Carter, it's funny, was the inverse. He had 11 goals, 4 assists last year.
That's right, he did. Wild. But like Puustinen and Heinen, just because we forget that Heinen almost fell off the face of the earth, by the way. He was like healthy scratched. He's still sitting in the top 3 comfortably of that bottom 6. And I mean, Kasperi Kapanen was also claimed off of waivers that year and was still top 3 of this list.
Yeah.
I mean, Lars Eller had a good year. That'll be nice to have back if he sticks around and is able to do that again, despite being one of the sneaky old guys on this team. Yeah, already major steps in the right direction for this Penguins bottom 6 because, like I said, you're reading those names off. I'm sitting here laughing. That is a laughable bottom 6 these last 2 seasons. Scoring-wise. Defense-wise, I think they were okay. I forget, kind of, mostly.
They were fine defensively, but at the same time, whenever you're a team that needs more goal scoring and your defense... Your actual defense is not good, and your goaltending is not good. A good defensive bottom 6 that doesn't score isn't really helping all that much. It's great that they didn't, look horrible in the defensive zone, but at the same time, the results stand for themselves, and they speak for themselves. They missed the playoffs the last 2 seasons. So the reason I bring this up is there is reason for encouragement in the Penguins bottom 6. Those names that we brought up, Beauvillier, Glass, Hayes, they can score points. They've proven they can score points as recently as 2 seasons ago. You bring in some young guys like Blake Lizotte, that's going to be pretty exciting. You bring in a young guy like Rutger McGroarty, that's going to be exciting. Maybe you get the opportunity to have Drew O'Connor in that bottom 6 a little bit more. Maybe Valtteri Puustinen takes a step this season. There is reason to believe that the ceiling is higher and the floor is higher for the Penguins bottom 6 when it comes to scoring this year. And that's just what we wanted to do today, because going into September, we need the vibes to be a little bit higher. So that's why we brought all of those things up. But let's finish things off with our weekly Pens poll. This was an interesting one because I didn't explicitly say it, but I did put in here that Sidney Crosby was going to break a record. Who's going to vote for it? And it ended up winning the poll. So let's go to it now. Which is most likely to happen in the 2024-25 season? The fans voted, 32% of them, Sidney Crosby to score 100-plus points, which just so happens to be an NHL record for most points scored by a 37-year-old, which is Joe Sakic with 100 points in 2006, 2007. Now, what did people think that is more likely to happen than? Erik Karlsson scoring 50-plus assists, 27% of the vote. I believe he's done that 4 or 5 times in his 16-year career. Brian Rust to score 30-plus goals. He has never done that, but he got 25% of the vote. And Tristan Jarry to have over a 910 save percentage, only 16 of the vote. So I ask you, Horwat, which of these scenarios is most likely to happen this season?
So I know the crowd went with the Crosby one.
Yes.
And we just had a discussion about Jari. Who knows what exactly happens there? I'm kind of torn between the middle two.
Mm-hmm.
I want to lean more toward Rust than I do Carlson. But when you look at, I'll start with Carlson for a minute. He had 45 assists last year. And we're discussing him getting 50. It's only 5 more.
Mm-hmm.
And we are expecting him to have a better season. We would have been expecting to have a better season even if the Penguins didn't add an old friend in Quinn behind the bench. So maybe that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that option. But I'm going to give Brian Rust the edge here because it is hard to get 5 more assists, even if that's sort of the name of his game almost. Brian Rust had 28 goals last year and arguably would have hit 30 had he not missed 20 games.
Yeah.
He needed 2 more. I think I get old Brian Rust, young Brian Rust, early career Brian Rust, what I'm trying to say. Was a bit streakier. I think me and you had discussions on that many a time whenever he went on long scoreless droughts and then had a hat trick to break it.
Yeah.
This new Brian Rust, as he ages, is a little bit more consistent. I think that sort of those stretches of long, paces and long games without scoring are gone and behind him. If he can play near 82, over 78, something like that, he can probably hit 30, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give that one my vote of confidence because it just seems the most likely. It seems like it should have happened already, especially. And listen, we all have faith in Sidney. All 3 of those, the Crosby, Rust, and Carlson stat lines are all extremely possible. Mm-hmm. We all have confidence that all 3 of those can happen. Mm-hmm. But if I had to pick a most likely, it's going to be Brian Rust. Also, man, I have no faith in Tristan Jari.
Yeah, I think most people don't. I'm surprised he got up to 16%. And those of you that did, I want what you're smoking because, that is a lot of copium right there, thinking he's going to have over a 9-10 save percentage. But I will agree that the top 3, Crosby, Carlson, and Rust, are obviously much more likely. And honestly, I will say this. I expect Carlson to have 50-plus assists. I expect Rust to have 30-plus goals for 2 reasons for Brian Rust. That one is a little bit, I think Carlson, you can get 5 more assists. If the power play is a modicum of consistent, then he is already over 50 assists this year. And we expect him to be good in year 2 and Quinn and all of that. You cover that well. Brian Rust, 2 reasons. 1, Jake Gensel is gone. Brian Rust is winger numero uno. He is the top winger for this team. He is the top option on the wing. He is the guy this year. That should get him some more opportunities to score. And like you mentioned, he's been more consistent in recent years. And number 2, Brian Rust had 3 power play goals last year, 25 even strength goals. Actually, did he have a shorthanded? That might be a little different. He did have 1 shorthanded goal. So 24 even strength goals last season. Those are ridiculous numbers. If he gets an opportunity on the power play to get even double 6 power play goals this year. And as you mentioned, if he stays healthy, I think it's a foregone conclusion in my eyes that he finally gets to that 30 goal mark. This is the 3rd straight season that I've been saying that. That was my bold prediction 2 years ago. That was my bold prediction last year. And I keep getting, stung by it. 2 years ago, he just struggled. Last year, it was the injuries. But I will say it again. Brian Rust will score 30 this year. I believe it. I think he is certainly a 30 goal scorer in talent and capabilities. Can he stay on the ice is the only question in my eyes because I think everything else is set up perfectly for him to go over that 30 mark.
It's got to happen at some point.
It does. Does not, actually. But, you'd hope it does. You'd hope it does. And as for Crosby, we brought up the list earlier and we were discussing it. To be in the top 12 of points scored at the age of 37, it is something that he typically does, which is over 71 points, which is Daniel Alfredsson at 12th. But you look at the names up there. Sakic, 100 points at the age of 37. Mario Lemieux had 91. Wayne Gretzky had 90. Joe Pavelski had 81. Underrated, sneaky good season for a 37-year-old. Another name on there, Alex Ovechkin, who's tied for 10th with Gordie Howe at 75. So, I mean, that's a list we'll keep track of this season. But honestly, 100 points is tough.
Yeah.
100 points is tough, even though there are more people doing it now than there ever have been before. It seems like every single year. Crosby's had 2 very, very good seasons back to back. And I understand he hasn't had a lot of help and you're hoping he has more this year, but he's had 2 very good seasons and he's finished in the lower to mid 90s. Can he push over that hump? Can the power play get him over the hump? Potentially. But I think I'm leaning towards either Carlson or Rust. And honestly, I'll put my vote on Rust to score 30 plus goals.
Yeah. If the Penguins had a rocking power play, all 3 of those would have been hit last year. Just randomly saying that.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. Not that Rust was on the power play a lot, but he probably would have gotten more opportunities just in general.
Yeah, I think the way they shuffled it, let's say it was clicking and they were still shuffling it as much as they did for some reason. Mm-hmm. Then yeah, he's obviously going to get those opportunities because he was still out. He was still on power play 2 at least for quite a bit of the season. So even if that contributes, it's 2 goals too. He finds a way. He was the closest one. Crosby had 94 points. He was 6 away from 100. Get a couple of power play points in there and you got it. Mm-hmm. Erik Karlsson, if he was quarterbacking a nice power play, there go a couple more goals right there. So, get the power play working and all those things should figure itself out. Once again, sorry to Tristan Jarry. I
mean, go out there and prove us wrong. That's exactly all I'll say. Not that our opinion means anything to him. Not that he's going to even hear it, but that's what mode he should be in going into this season. I want to prove everybody wrong because everybody's doubting me. And I will say everybody is doubting you except for 16% of the fan base. So, shout out to that 16% again. You guys have a lot of positive energy and I strive to be that someday. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. And remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.